Hi all, I thought I'd share a few thoughts on the literature review process that you're working on and the drafts that you'll be sharing this week and providing feedback on over the next week. So, what we've found looking at a number of kind of initial draft literature reviews is a couple of consistent themes. And one is the need to look at the literature review as a synthesis of literature. And you'll see this quote here from Pan 2003, defining what a literature review's major purpose is. Um, the importance of the literature review is really to come to those defensible conclusions about uh, the literature that you've surveyed in support of the work that you're going to be doing. So it's important to be careful not to focus the literature review just on saying what the literature is. It's really much more than that. It's providing a critique of that literature in order to get at the significant points that allow you to provide a solid framework on which to base your study. It is important to provide the background information and the background literature in support of your idea, but it makes most sense for that to be in the introduction. So I thought I'd show you an example literature review. I did a first draft for a research project that Morgan and I are working on, and if I can just move this over into the screen here, I'll do that. Um, let's see if I can make that bigger. I guess I'll have to do it manually. Things are a little bit slow. Very slow. Let's see if we can do this. Okay. So this was a literature review that I did to help frame a study of a face-to-face version of this class that we're using a blended approach with. So there's an option to leave class in the last hour and do an online assignment as opposed to staying and doing it. Of course, people can stay and do it as well. Um, so this review of the literature was intended to um, provide that kind of critical background that is needed in order to frame our study. And Morgan critiqued this and made some good points, I thought. And I'll touch on those in a second. But what I just want to point out is some of the organizational features. Um, and this is where it's a little bit tricky for you at this stage, because you've got to think of this literature review in the context of the more general research paper. There's an introduction, then there's the literature review, then there's the methodology section, and so you want to provide that distinction between the two. It's still necessary for you in your literature review to have some sort of introduction to the topic in order to kind of place things in context. But it's important not to get carried away with this, because that introductory piece is often best suited to the introduction. So this first paragraph here, the transformative potential of blended learning, you can look at that, maybe play this back again if you want to read it, just tries to generate some initial interest in the topic, and that is done by noting the investment, $20 million, by noting the scope of research, and noting an influential study. So this is to capture the reader's attention and address the point that this is very significant. blended learning is an important issue that needs to be investigated at this time, and this is why it's justification for the different areas that are going to be investigated here. So the point is that despite this being a significant thing, there's still significant work that needs to be done. And part of that is defining what the research is about. And I'm going from definitional and theoretical work that needs to be conducted in the field. This is my topic sentence that is going to frame the next two paragraphs. So the rest of this paragraph is going to talk about why we need to define it better, and then why we need to provide a theoretical model, and that's kind of underdeveloped here. It's a draft. And this is an area where Morgan would add more, because that's the aspect of the research that she's focused on. And then it transitions somewhat into addressing the literature more broadly from those foundational things, a need for a definition, a need for a theory. There's also several categories that emerge when we look at the literature. And these categories are let me see if I can pull up an example of how I got those categories. I'll do that in just a second. But these categories, similar to the coding procedure in qualitative research, in kind of an open coding method, you get the data, you look at the data, and you say, okay, this point has been raised, so I'm going to take a note of this point and I'll put it in this category here. Okay, look at the data again, this point has been raised, and that makes sense to call out. And you go through the data in the open coding methodology in the same way that you go through the literature reviews that you've conducted and taken notes on, and you say, okay, this is the point that's being made here, this is the point that's being made there, this point is repeated in several studies, and so categories begin to emerge, and those categories that begin to emerge can form the kind of key paragraph topics for your literature review. So this is the point that I'm making here. A more nuanced review of the literature reveals several additional emergent categories, that these things appear from the literature that's been reviewed, and that is learning effectiveness is important. And then really this is a draft, my first draft, and so under that category I would discuss this idea, and of course it's not going to be as strong as that statement. I'll have to qualify it and base it in that research and a critical understanding of that research. Student satisfaction has been shown to be important. The interface with the LMS has been both positive and a negative in the studies. The impact on faculty in terms of workload, and then this idea of referencing a model of disruptive change, and those were the kind of key categories that I pulled out, and I had some additional notes at the bottom. So that's really what I've done in that initial review of the literature, and I took that that review framework that I shared in the course. I know that Josie used that for her literature review, and I just looked at those categories that emerged out of that, and if I can pull this up here, let me see. Yeah, it's not that. It's difficult to read your files under pressure of recording. There it is. Okay, so that was going through that review, going from my initial review of the literature, which you've all conducted. um, I pulled out these topics. So identify benefits and challenges, compare outcomes, the transformative potential, which I wrote into the literature review in the introduction of that topic piece, um, faculty increased demands, the demands on students, the design, LMS functionality and usability, and need for an identified framework in which to place the study. And so what I did again with these categories is synthesize them into the important categories and most relevant categories for the literature review that I'm doing. Ultimately, I want to justify the research that's being done in my particular context. So if, let's say, this notion of proof of concept isn't so important to review the research on, for my particular study, then it's one that I can leave to the side and focus on what I need to do. And so this, as I said, this came from the initial blended review of research, this document here that I shared earlier. I think it'll open up. It's doing that on the other page. Very slowly. Okay, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with this document, but this is what I did. I went through the literature, identified my place, the title that I found it, the title, the methods used in the study, because these are important. I need to be able to kind of critique those in some cases for the literature review. And then the outcomes and findings, and then some additional notes. And so it was by going down this column here, the findings and notes, that I begin to identify my themes that I pulled into that list this list here. And I'll need to let that one go to voice message. So the points that Morgan raised, and this is something that will be helpful in the kind of critique phase of the literature review, were that this statement, the Department of Justice meta-analysis, was phrased in terms that she didn't completely agree with, as she has read the article as well, and so she wanted to kind of have a note to check that. She had a note as well to say a major foundation has funded, and I think in this draft it just touches on the one major foundation, but additional support might be needed from other foundations to support that idea that there's widespread investment in this, as we want to support that as much as possible. I think that there were other points that were raised about this that were a little problematic, but hey, it's a first draft. So when you think of reviewing your peers' literature reviews, think in terms of whether or not this is best suited to an introduction, and let me pull up an introduction to show you what that might look like. Or it belongs in that kind of literature review, which goes back to the idea, that original idea that was up on the screen, that it's really about a synthesis of the literature in order to deal with the inherent muddiness of research in support of the work that you would like to do, and obviously making that as balanced and being able to assess whether or not the studies that are introduced in the literature review are well done, demonstrates more effectively that your piece is based on a really good understanding of the quality of the support that you have and are presenting to your audience. So think of whether there's that introductory element to the blended learning literature review, and look at the organization. Organization's key in terms of the literature review, and maybe there's some facts or some language that seems a little bit strong. I mean, the fact is it's very difficult to say for certainty with any research that one thing or another is true, but it's about justifying that inclusion. So here's an introductory pitch just to kind of give you a sense of what that might look like. And this was from a review. I did an introductory draft for my piece in this class some time ago. And so it starts off with a more definitional piece. Again, I need to explain what online education is. I try to make this something that captures people's attention. The fact that online education grew at a rate of 10% in the US, and regular face-to-face education grew at about 2% in comparison to that. Technology is developing rapidly. What this means in terms of people's lives are quite substantial, and in terms of their ability to connect with individuals around the world and experts in the field is quite profound. So that was my introductory kind of aspect to the introduction, and then I define open online courses, identify some leaders in the field there, some ideas that I'll touch on more. The interest of this particular paper was in investigating massive open online courses that are freely available and open to everyone. So I address massive open online courses, again, some literature in support of what these are, and some critique and some balancing of their pros and cons. A little more information on that, but again, all of this is kind of leading into providing the reader with the background information they need to understand where this research topic is coming from, and this provides a little bit of the theoretical framework in the introduction as well, and it basically it identifies where we're going with this research. So that's the kind of introductory piece, and if you see a lot of that definitional piece in the literature review, then the literature review probably needs to kind of shift, or that piece needs to shift to the introduction, and the literature review needs to focus more systematically on the review of the literature, the synthesis of that literature into meaningful support for your proposed research project. So those are a few thoughts I had there. Hopefully that's helpful. Oh, and if you're still in doubt of what a literature review looks like, then the best thing to do is to go to the Mansfield Library, and you can do this online, of course, and go to the thesis and dissertations collection. And I think probably the easiest way to do that is just to Google it. Theses and dissertations Missoula. You could do it through the library, but this one works pretty well. And then there it is, electronic theses and dissertations. And then here you'll get some examples of all the different dissertations that have been produced, and they just give you examples of literature reviews, and really I think those examples are perhaps one of the most helpful things. So good luck. Let Morgan and I know if you have any questions, and we'll be in touch. See if I can stop the recording now.